Welcome to another video. This time I'm going to cover a stippling drawing project. I'm going to talk about what materials you're going to need. I'm going to talk about what stippling is and how you complete this project. And there's two different ways to do this project, so I'm going to cover it all in this video. First, I'd like to talk about the materials that you are going to need for this project. Any kind of pencil is fine. We're not going to use the pencil very much, but it's good to have one on hand. We're mostly going to be using fine liner pens. Now, the most popular brand of fine liner pens are these Micron pens. They're very inexpensive and they work great. And they come in different sizes. So, as you can see here, for example, I have a Micron 01 pen, and there's a 005, that's the smallest size. I've got a 03, a 05. Anyway, they come in, here is, actually I wouldn't even really suggest using the 08 size very much for this project. But if you have it, then you probably have a wide range of sizes here to pick from, and that's really what you need. I would suggest at the very least to have a 01, a 03, and a 05. I would say that would be a good, range of at least a couple sizes to work with. However, if you have more sizes, that's even better. If you want an alternative brand to Micron, Prismacolor makes pretty much the same thing. I really like these pens quite a bit, and hopefully you can see there the ends of the pen have the sizes, and it's just like the Micron. So there you can see a 01 size there on the Prismacolor, Prismacolor Premier illustration pens, I think is what they're called. They actually on the package call them markers, but I would call them fine liner pens. But anyway, I really like these once again. So either one is a great choice. Let's see here. You are going to need some tracing paper. Keep a scissors on hand just in case. I have a cutting mat here. We may or may not need it depending on how you do the project. If you have a light box or light pad, it's helpful, but I will show you one way to potentially get around using a light box. But really, really great item to have. Now you can find them really cheap on Amazon these days, so that's where I got mine, and I'm super happy with it. I use it all the time. Anyway, artist tape. This is a low tack tape. You may or may not need an X-Acto blade, and I'll talk about that later. Scissors is probably going to be fine. And you may not even need the scissors. Again, there's a couple ways to do this project, so we'll see when we get there if we need it. You're going to need some paper. I'm going to be using Bristol paper 11 by 14 today. However, if you have a heavyweight drawing paper such as the Strathmore 400 series drawing paper, that would also work because we're using pen. So we need something that's going to be heavy enough to use pen on it. We may or may not use some either circle templates or a compass tool to make some circle shapes or a ruler. We can also make some shapes with a ruler. But even if we don't make shapes for our design, you'll want a ruler we're going to make a crisp border around our drawing paper. And then the last thing I can think of here to mention is the transfer paper. So we'll be using that. Now, if you run out of transfer paper, there is a way to kind of make your own. If you have a very soft lead pencil, you can basically use the side of the pencil to apply graphite on an entire a sheet of paper, like a thin paper such as a tracing paper or printer paper, and then kind of use that as a transfer paper. That kind of takes a long time and it's not always as effective, so I would highly recommend just getting the transfer paper and using that instead. Anyway, I think that's it for material. So now I would like to talk about real briefly what is stippling. Stippling is a drawing method using lots of tiny little dots to create an image. So I always feel like this is a really great introductory kind of a project for students to learn how to draw with a range of value. And by value, I mean a range from light to dark. So instead of only drawing with line, now we actually are applying some value to create these three-dimensional shapes. Now this is not the project we're doing. This is a handout that I give my students that will be a practice page for them that they're going to do first, because stippling, the technique, it does take a little bit of practice at first to kind of get the hang of it, get the feel of it, make it look nice. So that's why we do the handout first and then we get into the project. So anyway, stippling, you create the image with dots, and we are going to actually use a photo reference to create this project. So you have two options for this project. The first option is that you can take your own photograph, make sure it's a black and white photograph, or make sure you edit it later to be a black and white photograph. And it can be any subject matter that you want. You just take your own photo of whatever you are interested in to draw. Just make sure that there is a range of value represented in your photograph to use as a reference photo. So that's the first option, is that you can do that, or you can use a found image. So what is a found image? That means any image that's out there, maybe that you find online, for an example. However, if you do use a found image, you do need to change at least one thing about the design in order to make it a little bit more of your own. Even though we are making it our own by drawing it, but I want to get us as far away from plagiarism as possible. So I would like, if you are using a found image, to add at least one element to your composition to change it up. Now you could do this by maybe adding some 2D shapes, such as some circles or lines in the background or in the subject matter, or something. I think the background is probably like one of the easier things to do. You could create like a little square or rectangle shape that acts as a window. Maybe inside the window you switch the maybe switch out the image in just that window or something. So you can get creative with how you kind of change it. You could even collage a couple found images together and then use that as your reference photo or reference image. You could create a pattern in the background. You could create a gradient effect with a stippling in the background. Options are endless as long as you are changing it in some way to make it your own. So I'm going to kind of show you examples of both, because I used to do this project where I copied a found photo and I didn't make any changes. So I'm going to actually show that to you. So I used this photo, and this is what the end result looked like. So again, the problem is that it's just copying and it doesn't really make it as much of your own design as it could be. So what are some options? Maybe I could have done some repeated pattern shapes. Maybe make them solid, or maybe make them just the white of the paper, or maybe I could have done a pattern in the background. Maybe I could have collage some sort of element here to make it different. I don't know. There's probably a lot of different options. And if you've done collage before, then you know how to do that. So you could just create your own little collage of found images and then use that. But see how this image has a really wide range of value. Everything from a real dark black to a really light value there. So there's a range to work from. So those are the kind of images you want to look for, or if you're taking your own photo, just make sure that you are thinking about the lighting, making sure that you are not taking a photo that's really flat or blown out. So anyway, that's what you want to look for. And so you have these two options of how you want to do this. But anyway, this is what stippling looks like once it's finished. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful technique. It's very soft looking. It's very unique. I've seen it a lot in tattoos. Some tattoo artists may use that style sometimes, but in artwork, I've seen it, but it's not as popular anymore, I don't think, or I think it's kind of like a niche kind of a technique. Not a lot of people use it because it is a little bit time consuming. However, I do feel like the payoff at the end is totally worth it. It's worth the time spent. Okay, so there's that example. Now I'm going to walk you through the steps of how to actually do this, and I am going to use an image that I took. This is my own photograph of my the last remnants of my blooming orchid flower that I put in a little vase. And one way that I'm going to simplify this is I'm actually going to keep the background white in my image. So I'll get to that in a moment, but that's what we're going to do. Now, first, I would like to utilize this handout here. Let me grab some pens. Okay, so I've got a range of pens here. I'm going to grab I'm just going to start with a 1, a 3, and a 5 in these Micron pens. Okay, so basically with this handout, I'm just going to copy what's over here and put it over here. And I also kind of want to do a little value scale on the side to kind of show you what this looks like. Now, with stippling, the way you make the value look lighter is you spread out the dots more. And if you want to make the value look darker, you place the dots closer together. So as you can see, even just with this one pen size, I can achieve that effect. So see how that is a lighter value than this because this is all condensed. But if you want to push it even further, now I'm using the 0.1 micron pen size. If I wanted to push it even further, I could go a little bit bigger in the dot size and put the dots even closer together. So not only is the dot size bigger, but the dots are closer together. So that can make the value of this area look even darker. So this is not like a proper value scale. I'm just going to quickly show you on the side here, and then I'm going to show you also with one of these little shapes here. Okay, so that's with the size 3, and then I could go to my larger size 5, and now that's an even bigger dot, and I'm going to really squish these dots close together. Now, as you can see, the darker values take more time. So this is something that you want to consider when you're practicing and you're realizing how much time this takes. This will kind of help you decide with your design, your your reference image of choice. If there's a lot going on in the background, like the image that I showed you guys of the one that I'm going to do, you may want to simplify and just use a simplified background, or just, you know, use the white of the paper as your background, because dense, dark values like this do take a lot of time to fill in. Now, you know, you want to do what's best for your drawing, whatever is going to look best, whatever you're interested to do, but just keep those things in mind when you're choosing the reference image, as well as when you are thinking about the design. Okay, like, see how much darker that looks than these guys up here? So you get the idea, right? So if I was going to fill in this top one, as you can see here, the darkest value on this cone is the shadow on the right hand side. So I would go in with the 05 pen and keep the dots pretty close together. So some things to think about when you are doing this practice sheet, when you're using this stippling technique for the first time, you want to keep your pen vertical, straight up and down. If you angle it too much, you're going to accidentally get little lines like that instead of nice crisp points. So that's the first thing to consider. Also, you want to get in a rhythm. I suggest listening to music when you do this, so you can get into a consistent rhythm. It also helps distract you from, you know, the time, because you are going to have to exercise some patience while doing this process. So having a rhythm is important, and it helps you to keep a good, consistent pace. You don't want to rush this. If you rush it, even if I'm keeping my pen vertical, if you rush it too much, you also get little lines and the dots look sloppy. So that is not going to give you a nice finished polished look with this drawing. You really want your dots to look like round dots, not little lines, okay? So please don't rush the process. Also, try to avoid going too dark too fast. You can always add more dots to darken an area, but this is ink, so once you make a mark, you can't take it away. So if you go too dark, you know, you can't lighten it. And we are trying to match as accurately as possible what is in our reference image. So keep that in mind. And the fourth tip that I'm going to give you, which is very important, is remember to relax your wrist and your arm. It's very, very easy when you're doing this to tense up, and you might tense up your shoulder, your wrist, your arm, or maybe all three. And it's really dangerous, because you could tire out really quickly where you can't draw for very long. But also, you know, these repetitive movements can be real stressful on your arm and wrist. And you know, people who do things like a lot of typing for their job over the years, because it's a repetitive movement, they end up getting carpal tunnel, and a lot of artists end up getting that as well. So we don't want to aggravate that possibility. But also, you know, it's just not necessary. You don't have to grip your hand very hard. You don't have to tire out your arm while you're doing this. Make sure your hand is rested down on the surface, so don't try to like keep it in the air when you're making dots. That's not going to give you the control that you need, but also it's just going to tire out your arm. So make sure that you're staying relaxed. Listen to some relaxing music. Just get in a rhythm here. So this is looking pretty dense and dark. I could definitely go darker when I compare it to there, but I'm going to do a little bit more work before I go back and darken that. I'm going to move up to the size 3 pen, and I'm going to start spacing out the dots more for this lighter value on this side of the cone. Now I have seen artists who use all one pen size for their entire image, and it can look nice. There's nothing wrong with that. I just like to teach this project using the different sizes because I really feel like it gives some variety and character to the look of your drawing. And it's just nice to have those options of those different sizes. I feel like for the real dark, dense values, the job gets done a little bit faster with using those larger pen sizes rather than if you were using if you did the whole drawing with that 005 size, the smallest size, it would definitely take longer than if you were using these variety of pen sizes. So that's why I like to teach this project using a variety. So I can see in comparison to this one definitely has more of that darker, it's kind of a harsh transition. Right there is where it starts to get darker. So I am going to establish that area here. So that's kind of where the transition is going to happen. So I can darken that whole right side with my 0.5 size pen. Now, again, the largest size you could go with is 0.8. I personally feel like, I don't know, I personally feel like when students use that size pen, they go a little bit overboard using that size, and then we kind of lose some of those softer detail kind of areas of the drawing. Everything starts to look a little bit too harsh if you overuse that 0.8 size pen. So for me, I prefer the 0.5 as the darkest one, or sorry, not the darkest one, as the largest pen size for the dark areas. However, it's your drawing, so you can always try it out on this handout sheet or on a separate piece of paper to see how it looks and determine for yourself what you think looks best. There's really no right or wrong answer to using that size. That's just my personal preference and my experience of doing these stippling drawings of how it turns out, at the end when you use too much of the 0.8. So I would say if you do use a 0.8, just kind of use it sparingly, only in the very, 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 very darkest areas. Try not to bring it into any of the lighter areas. Okay. Okay, so this is looking pretty good for that darkest area. And let's see, that smaller size, 0.1, I'm just going to add a few more, make that kind of an easier transition from the dark to the light. So don't forget once in a while to kind of stop and look at the whole thing, not just the tiny little area that you're working on, so you can see it as a whole and make sure that you are not overdoing it. So I would say if this is your first time stippling, doing this little practice sheet is really important. You don't want to just jump into the drawing because, again, we're using pen and you don't want to mess things up right away. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. I would suggest doing the whole thing, like the little cast shadow in the background and stuff for the practice, but you guys get the idea here. I think we can move on to the process now of how to actually do this project. So, of course, the first step is choosing your reference image. And remember, I just discussed earlier that there's those two options, found image versus your own image. I'm using my own image here. So I want to show you that because I decided to eliminate the background information, I would suggest, just because you're going to be looking at this for reference for your own drawing, that you either use a scissors or an X-Acto knife on a cutting mat to trim this out so that I can actually look at this image on a white background. So let me do that real quick to show you. Now, as I'm cutting this out, I forgot to mention that you're going to want to print out your image at 8 by 10 inch size. That is the size of that's what our drawing size is going to be. So even if your paper is 11 by 14 inches, you're going to center the 8 by 10 inch frame inside there. Okay, so as you can see, now I could just set this on a white piece of paper and use that, because I know that my finished drawing, I want to have a blank background. So this is just nice, so I'm not all distracted by that crazy busy background. I can just use this. Now, I would suggest, you know, all this little negative space, like in between the fingers where you can see the background, I would trim that out with a knife just to be real thorough. In the interest of doing this demo quickly, I'm not going to do that right now, but just keep in mind that's my suggestion. So anyway, and again, you don't have to have a white background. You can have whatever background you want to have, but for my drawing, I decided I didn't like the background that was in my image. I just wanted to keep things simple, so I did this. Okay, now the next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to grab a piece of tracing paper, and you're going to want to trace your image. You'll want to grab a Micron pen and trace the line work. So don't fill anything in terms of value or anything like that. We're only doing contour line. Now, if your image is super dark, it may be difficult to see through the tracing paper. So I would suggest, if you have a light box, to use it. So I would turn that on, and I would be able to see this so much better. If you don't have a light box, I would suggest working on this during the day so that you can use the light coming in from your window. I'll insert a little video of me doing that so you can see what I mean. So I just wanted to show you using a window. So I have here my reference image and my tracing paper. Hopefully you can see how easy it is to see through that now that I have the light coming in through the window. So you can use this instead of a light pad if you're doing this during the day. Obviously, this isn't an option if you're doing your homework at night, but it is one option if you're working during the day. Another option would be if you have a glass coffee table or something like that and you want to put a light underneath and then put this on top of the glass. That works as a light table as well, or a light pad. I happen to have a light pad, one of those cheap ones from Amazon. I think they run around 20 bucks. So I'm using that today. It's so much easier for me to just have that on hand when I do these kinds of projects. And in the interest of doing this quickly for the demo, I've already traced this. So that's what my tracing looks like. Now we are ready to transfer this right onto the drawing paper. Now, this is why I had you print out your image at 8 by 10, because the size of this is not changing. We're copying it onto our Bristol paper using the transfer paper. Okay, so what you're going to need to do next is what you see here. Basically, after I put my border on, I grabbed a piece of transfer paper and I laid it face down on the drawing paper. So again, the transfer paper was this guy right here. So the transfer paper only has graphite on one side. It's usually the darker side, so that goes face down. And then you put your contour drawing on top, and then you are ready to transfer. So what you're going to want is to grab a hard lead pencil or a hard tip pen and just go over the lines that you already have. Just trace everything, and I'll show you if I lift this up. See how I placed some tape there? That's so that if I need to lift this up, this is not going to move around. You definitely want to secure this down. You don't want to do like half of your work and then have it move, and then it's not going to be consistent. But anyway, if you can see there, the lines are transferring. Graphite lines right onto the page. So anyway, I'm going to finish this and then show you the next step. Okay, so I finished my tracing, or my transfer I should say, and if you get any little smudges, of course you can just use kneaded eraser and clean that up. But yeah, the transfer turned out really well. I do really like that brand of transfer paper, the Ceral brand. But anyway, at this point you are ready to use your fine liner pens to use the stippling technique. Now, once again, highly suggest practicing on either that handout sheet or a separate piece of paper, using the tips that I mentioned before starting in on this. You want to make sure you get a really good idea of the feel of it, how to get those nice, crisp, round looking dots, and controlling the range of value, right? And you're going to want to have your reference really close by. Now I'm right-handed, so my hand is going to be here, so I would want this on the left as I'm looking at it. Move that stuff aside. So yeah, I would want this here, and I would just try to replicate the values as close as I can from my reference. So now obviously I'm leaving the background white, and that is going to be the lightest value, because as you can see, even though this orchid petal is white, it's not as white as the white of my background. I mean, this is a bright white paper, right? So I am going to want a slightly darker value than the white of my paper. So I would go with the smallest pen size that you have for an area like that, and I would really spread out the dots. Now, keep in mind at the end of this process, after you lay all your dots down and after it's finished, you are going to go through with a kneaded eraser and erase any pencil lines. So the lines are going to go away and you're just left with dots. So if I really wanted to make sure that the edge of my petal is still visible, I would probably want to do some of these small dots just on the edge of the petal, just so that there is that clear separation between the petal and the background. So I would start out with really spread out dots, because I can always add more. Like, I wouldn't do any more than that for now. Once I start adding the other values in, just by comparison and looking back and forth between this and this, it'll be easier to tell if I need to make that darker or not. But I just want to show you how that looks. If I erase those pencil lines, ooh, and you know what? I think that ink was still a little bit wet. I was a little bit anxious to show you guys, so whoops. Oh well. Yeah, definitely make sure that the ink is dry before you erase, because I just smeared some of my dots. But I'm hoping to show you if I can get my camera to focus in on this. There we go. Yeah, my dots are not crisp anymore because I just smudged them, but yeah, learn from my mistakes, right? Yeah, so that could be like a really light value, and then using the exact same technique that I talked about in the handout. So grab, let's see, yeah, let's see, we have a darker area here. So I'm gonna put the dots a little closer together. I can always make it darker later if it needs to be. It probably will, but for now, see how I just have a consistent rhythm, and my wrist is totally relaxed. Just keeping my pen vertical as I continue to add dots, trying to keep them somewhat evenly spaced for this whole area. I can get more detailed with it later, but that's enough for now. Now, obviously, that value looks darker than this, so I probably will have to add more later, but I'm kind of just getting started. I don't want to go too dark too fast. So anyway, that's my recommendation for how to get started with this. Obviously, this is, you know, adding the dots, this is the most time-consuming part of the whole process. So this is not a project that you want to procrastinate on at all. This is going to take some time and patience. So like I said, once you're done with the pen work, you make sure the ink is dry. And honestly, the ink doesn't take long to dry. I would, like, you know, probably takes a couple minutes and then it'll be totally dry. You can use the kneaded eraser, erase all the graphite lines, and then you can peel off the artist tape because you don't need that anymore, and you'll just be left with these really nice crisp white borders and a very nice finished drawing. So that is it for this project. Hope these tips were helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.